about the unexpected visit that took place recently, and this concerns the residence of the Russian ruler in Valdai. The self-proclaimed president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, flew there. Interestingly, the meeting of the dictators took place the very next day after Lukashenko claimed to have had a conversation with representatives of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Belarus. The fact that Putin and Lukashenko did not plan to meet in person is also indicated by the location of their meeting. After all, the Russian ruler usually does not invite international leaders to Valdai. The Kremlin, meanwhile, stated that the officials discussed trade and economic cooperation and that there would be no statements to the media following the meeting. NATO, meanwhile, is preparing a financial package for Ukraine worth 140 billion euros. According to Politico, citing alliance diplomats, the new multi-billion aid package will be officially announced next month at the summit in Ankara. According to the draft declaration, the Allies plan to allocate 70 billion euros in military aid to Kyiv in 2026, and at least the same amount the following year. This package will be funded exclusively by the European countries of the alliance, without the participation of the United States. And this will become part of a new strategy in which Europe assumes primary responsibility for the continent's defense, focusing on the procurement of long-range weapons and air defense systems. We will discuss all of this further. Joining us is Ihor Chelenko, political scientist and head of the Center for Analysis and Strategies. Mr. Ihor, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
Let's start with the unexpected, as it's being described, unexpected meeting at Valdai. We've already noted that international guests at Valdai have become a rarity. And so, this element of surprise. Mr. Ihor, in your opinion, who was surprised? Lukashenko, Putin, the media? Who is actually surprised?
Well, basically, let's just say that the highly ambiguous and somewhat mysterious announcement regarding the upcoming meeting between Lukashenko and Putin left many observers and the general public feeling quite uncertain about how exactly the two dictators were supposed to meet. Furthermore, the specific format here is particularly and incredibly interesting when viewed from the perspective of all this intense secrecy. So, with all that in mind, what exactly was discussed during their time together? That is, after the first day, we saw a certain press release, and basically people were trying to read between the lines to figure out what the real essence of this conversation was. Well, when everything ends with talk about regional cooperation and security in the region, we all perfectly understand that, in fact, what's really being discussed is that Putin, in my opinion, wants greater and greater involvement of Belarus in the war against Ukraine. And Lukashenko is seeking protection because he fully understands that if he goes along with the things Putin is asking of him, then Belarus will become a target, exposed from all sides, and as a result, will suffer as quickly as possible as a direct consequence of Putin's policies. And here the real question is, what exactly does Putin want from Lukashenko? Is it solely about getting Belarus involved in the war against Ukraine? Or does he want to use Belarus more actively as a staging ground against EU and NATO countries? This is something we've seen repeatedly, for example, the legends around Zapad 2025 when the Suwałki Gap was discussed, or again the ongoing construction of infrastructure both in the south and in the north of Belarus. So there are many nuances there, but nevertheless, at least as of now, there are no signs that Lukashenko has agreed with Putin's position. Although on the second day of their negotiations, the fact that discussions began with expanded delegations is also a classic move by Lukashenko. He may agree to some minor things, but in return he tries to get as many so-called financial perks from the Russian Federation as possible, which they then present as cooperation within the framework of the Union state. But nevertheless, even at this late stage in the conflict, at least there is still a widespread belief that Lukashenko is not entirely driven by a suicidal impulse, and that he will not take the final irreversible step that would truly plunge the entire nation of Belarus directly into the devastating jaws of an all-out war.
Mr. Ihor, is it within the realm of possibility that, that Lukashenko and Belarus serve the interests of and fully satisfy the Russian Federation only as, let's say, a subordinate economic appendage, pardon the ambiguity of the term, and as a vital sanctions buffer? and absolutely nothing more than that. It won't stop.
Well, this is exactly such a transitional format. This is what Lukashenko might be betting on. Indeed, it's absolutely to show that he is still with Vladimir Vladimirovich, but not to expose himself completely. Because even the story with the retransmitters, the fact is, and there's actually a very interesting aspect here, that the Belarusians didn't turn off all the retransmitters, but only those retransmitters that they still could turn off. I won't go further for now, I understand. I won't explain this, but this is exactly the situation when good people are sending the right signals to the Belarusians. So in this situation, regarding economic support, well, we also have to remember that the Belarusian defense industry is integrated into the overall Russian one. The training grounds in Belarus are being used for exercises. A lot of equipment, previously armored vehicles, were taken out of storage in Belarus and sent to meet the needs of the Russian Federation. Now, the two oil refineries, Naftan and Mozir, are working more to meet Russia's needs than even the internal needs of Belarus. Well, for comparison, Belarus consumes about 500 to 600,000 tons of petroleum products per month from these plants, while up to 800,000 tons per month are sent to Russia either as direct deliveries or supposedly as transit, though in reality, there is no actual transit. So just do the math and see who these plants are actually supplying now. I think these aspects are also extremely important. Obviously, it's also important for Putin that, for example, that same diesel goes to meet the needs of, among others, the Russian occupation army, because there are problems with this as well as numerous testimonies from Russian soldiers themselves show. In other words, the crisis has indeed reached the Russian army as well, and there are many other such aspects. Indeed, continued support from Minsk is still important to Putin.
We still have 2 or 3 minutes, Mr. Ihor, and here's another angle we mentioned. NATO is preparing a financial package for Ukraine worth 140 billion. Well, that's the total amount being discussed. The summit in Ankara. What are your expectations regarding the 70 billion already announced for 2026? And as far as I remember, Fico has already said that they will not support this. The summit in Ankara and this aid, as they say, the pros, the cons, the hidden pitfalls. We have 2 minutes, please.
Regarding Fico and his statement about not supporting the decision on specifically the package for Ukraine, let me remind you the summit in Ankara is on July 7th and 8th, so it's coming up very soon. What's the logic here? It's absolutely typical that, accordingly, Fico's Bratislava doesn't want funds to be allocated from its budget, meaning it doesn't want to give its own resources. So obviously there will be some exceptions for certain countries. Well, for example, possibly the Czech Republic. Perhaps under the current circumstances, Bulgaria might say somewhere that it doesn't want to participate. So the point is that not all NATO member countries will be involved, but only those who really will take part in this. Well, I don't see a huge problem with that. Nevertheless, the main thing here is the change in the position of the United States. You pointed out correctly that, well, they are not contributing financially, but the main thing is that they are ready to sell the necessary weapons. Previously, the discussion was that by 2026, NATO countries as a whole would provide $60 billion. Now this has increased to $70 billion, and there is confirmation for $70 billion next year as well. This is precisely what shows the Russian Federation that it really needs to stop. This is an important signal specifically for the Kremlin that there is no point in continuing this war because Ukraine will continue to receive the necessary military assistance next year as well. And it is obvious that if the war goes on, then it will be necessary to sit down at the negotiating table. That is why this important summit in Ankara serves both to meet the immediate needs of Ukraine's defense forces and as a clear signal to the Russian aggressor about the necessity of real negotiations.
Let them catch these signals. Mr. Ihor, thank you very much for taking the time on such a morning. Ihor Chelenko, political scientist, head of the Center for Analysis and Strategy.